Okay, so the first one.
Okay.
This person said, boundaries, it sounds so selfish. The Bible talks about serving and laying down our life. How do I balance biblical ideas and healthy boundaries? Chip, I'm so glad you could join us. And I know that so many people have gotten so many relational insights out of this, just like John and I have. And what I've got now is this incredible opportunity to answer questions. We had so many people say, if I could sit down with Chip, this is what I'd want to know. So I'm going to fire questions at you.
All right.
And I believe you're going to have answers for these.
All right.
Okay, so the first one.
Okay.
This person said, boundaries, it sounds so selfish. The Bible talks about serving and laying down our life. How do I balance biblical ideas and healthy boundaries?
Yeah, that's a great question. I hear that a good bit. Probably my answer would be that serving is my deciding to do something for your benefit. Boundaries come into play because if I need you to like me, want you to like me, I want to belong to the whatever clique you're a part of, and I serve you, I'm serving you to get something back from it. And I would call that more mutual manipulation than I would serving. Serving is when I can say no to you, but I choose not to, and I serve you. But if I can't say no to you, if I feel compelled to do what you need me to do, I just don't know that that's serving. I think a lot of it goes on in the body of Christ that we call serving. I would call mutual manipulation.
Wow.
It's different ways that we guilt each other into doing things. And I'm even real sensitive to how people set things up in their questions and, with each other. And I just think we need to be free to respond even incorrectly.
Yeah.
And if we are, then what I do is true serving.
Yeah.
But if I basically don't have a choice to come off looking right, then I don't know that I call it serving.
You know, I've had a lot of wives tell me that they've had their husbands say, you have to submit to me because I am the head of the household. Now, how do you weave this in? Because you know that that's a difficult one.
Yeah, I love that one. We talk in the course about 3 things that run together, and they always run in this order: responsibility, authority, and power. And God always defines our responsibility, gives us the authority within the realm of that responsibility, and then the power to carry out to back up our authority. So when a husband centers on the phrase, wives submit to your husbands, what he's doing is he wants authority, and he wants his authority to be honored. And quite honestly, we help him out quite a bit because we'll talk about honoring the office and all that kind of thing. My deal is this. I have a little story I tell in the course that, Bubba brings that up to me. Hey, preacher, the Bible. And I say, Bubba, what's your job? And Bubba doesn't know his job.
No, they do know the women's job.
Yeah.
Yes, they do. Yes.
And so for me, when I say, what's your job? I don't know. It's love your wife as Jesus loves the church. So here's the thing. If you do your responsibility, you won't have to, proclaim your authority.
Right.
If you do your job correctly, she's going to want to follow you.
Right.
So as soon as you use what I call ultimatum authority, you've already lost.
Wow. Okay, so this is also kind of weaving around the same topics. How do you apply healthy boundaries in different cultures? I told you I'm getting ready to go to a culture that is very different than the American culture.
Yeah.
You've got people all over the world. How do we apply these?
I got hit with this. This has been a few years back. I was teaching in a setting, multicultural setting, and I mean internationally. And there was a group of women from an Asian country. And I could, how you can tell when somebody's not with you, they're frumping, when you're up talking.
Yes.
And I could tell they were kind of, pushing back.
Yeah.
So during the break, I kind of said, well, hey, what's going on? And broken English. And they said, this could never work in our culture. And because they talked about revering the elders and past generations and all that. And what came to me, and I'm not saying it's a perfect answer, but what came to me is we're called to enter and build the kingdom of God, which is a culture. So I believe It's our challenge, no matter what culture we're a part of, to figure out where our culture and God's culture align and where they don't. And now, do I say you just blow it up and make everybody mad or whatever? I mean, occasionally you may have to. But for the most part, if you just incrementally begin to shift toward a more biblical kingdom culture, again, ultimately, my responsibility, your responsibility is to express the kingdom of heaven and earth. Not, if it can be done through the coloration of your culture, that's wonderful.
Right.
But if it can't, then it's your culture that needs to shift.
Yeah, and a lot of cultures, I don't, want to act like the Western culture is a kingdom culture. Everything about the kingdom is very counterculture most of the times.
Right.
Okay, so here's another one. What are appropriate boundaries in instances where abuse is present? This is not an easy one.
No, I mean, legally as a counselor, you have things you have to adhere to. They call it the duty to warn. You have to, if you know there's physical abuse happening, sexual abuse. Verbal abuse would be a little trickier, but you have a legal obligation to report. From a spiritual standpoint, my thing is to honor the spirit of the marriage or the spirit of whatever the relationship is, but let's assume it's something as serious as a marriage. I believe you can honor the spirit of the marriage, but still take appropriate steps to protect the person.
So if I'm a wife and I'm in a situation where I feel that my safety is threatened,
Right.
not just my husband's saying things that are hurting my heart, but
Right.
my safety is threatened, what would you say to me?
I would say to you that we have an obligation to report it to the proper authorities,
Okay.
and let's get you somewhere safe.
Yeah.
And hopefully we would have a church community and family that would be able to accommodate that temporarily while we figured out a longer term solution.
Yeah, I think that there should be a group of men that women that feel threatened by some other man in their life, they can, the women in the church can call, those brothers show up and they escort the husband out. I think that's what should happen.
I thought you said they were going to come over and work the guy over.
Yeah,
and I
well,
was
that
like,
would be the Sicilian part of me saying
it's a creative
that.
solution.
But I do think a lot of times we have blurred these lines in the church.
Absolutely.
And things that are illegal should not just be handled alone in the church. If it's illegal, you need to bring someone outside of the church when it breaks the law. And I hope you understand, we're giving you permission. We don't want you to be at risk. We don't want you to not be safe. We don't want your children to not be safe. We don't want you to say, oh, but I'm trying to cover for my husband. No, you're not uncovering your husband by protecting your children. Your husband uncovered himself when he made those choices. So we want you safe. And you know what? When there's consequences, that's a catalyst for change. So another question, what is the difference between being a nurturer, somebody who gives nurture, and somebody that is an enabler?
Okay, the key word for me when you're in this area is the word responsibility. So what we want to do is make sure the person who makes choices is responsible for the consequences of those choices.
Okay.
So one of the main forms of enabling is person A makes bad choices.
Right.
Person B cleans up the mess.
Right.
Pays for the bill or in some way protects them, calls work and says they're sick when really they're hungover. So person A's made bad choices and they've produced bad consequences, but person B is paying for them.
Right.
And that would be classic definition of enabling, where you're not allowing the person to the way we learn to make good choices is by making bad ones.
Right.
If we pay for them.
You know, I remember God just really dealing with me about something and saying, there's nothing more frustrating than feeling responsible for something you have no authority over.
Right.
So if you feel responsible to I have to fix this, I have to fix this. Well, why do you have to fix it?
Right.
So what a nurturer would do in that situation, someone makes a mess, what would a nurturer do?
Well, you used an interesting phrase there. You feel the desire, the responsibility to fix something, but you have no authority. If you feel responsibility but have no authority, it's false responsibility.
Right.
Because if it's God-given responsibility, the authority to carry it out would be there. So I can want to help you, but I've got to deal with the reality of how the universe works. And if you don't want to pay the price to get healthier, if you don't want to pay the price to break the cycle, then my helping you is probably a form of enabling. and it's probably something I better enjoy because I'm going to be doing it for a long time.
So a nurture could actually let somebody suffer consequence.
A healthy nurture.
Exactly.
Yes.
Say,
A
I love
healthy
you.
nurturer should
I love
realize.
you, but
yes, absolutely.
but I'm not going to rescue you because I'm not actually really helping you when I rescue all the time.
Right.
Okay. All right, great. Okay, good question. How can I be a good step parent? I know this is complicated to kids that live with me and my spouse.
All right, blended families are tricky. Rule of thumb I use is this: whoever is the natural parent should set the standard for disciplining those children. In other words, they were a part of that other home for however long. Now they've come with whichever spouse into this home. The step parent should not be the one that brings his or her philosophy of parenting, style of discipline, expectations, et cetera. It needs to be the natural parent that sets the tone and implementation of that. Otherwise, it creates the opportunity for a lot of playing this one against that one. And it's not easy.
No.
Any conversations need to be had in private.
Yeah.
And you figure out how to go out in front of the kids and give a unified front.
And I would think that the natural parents would have to have an agreement. This is what we are both upholding. So it isn't one set of discipline when they're with the father and then another set of discipline when they're with the mother. Okay.
That would be ideal.
Yeah, ideally.
But I would have to say most of the time doesn't work out that smoothly.
You know, I've had opportunity to talk to a couple of couples that actually have had a great, I didn't understand how they did, but have had a great response. And they actually said, they came to the mom and said, I really love your children and I really respect your role and how can I be helpful and not be a competitor. I'm not trying to take your role as favorite mother, but I want to be supportive. And she said it took some time, but then the mother was really cooperating and really appreciated that she loved the children. So a healthy mom would want that.
It could go a whole lot better than it frequently does.
Right. This is a question I wish I'd had the answer to about 10 years ago. It says, how do you have boundaries in relationships with parents, siblings, in-laws who are emotionally draining? How do you do that? How do you set up those boundaries? They're parents, siblings, in-laws.
Yeah.
Family.
All right, interesting little phrase. You train people how to treat you. In other words, behavior that I reward, I'm going to get more of. Behavior I don't reward, I hopefully will get less of.
Yeah.
So I'm wired in such a way that I would probably have a chat with them. And I would probably say, hey, love you guys. Love to have a very healthy, engaging relationship. But there's times when it's just very draining. It's very difficult. And I'd be happy to try to figure out how to help you overcome that.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, it's probably going to affect the frequency with which we come to visit. Now, I would probably handle it something like that. You don't necessarily have to be that direct. What you could do is just implement the plan without explaining it. Meaning, you train people how to treat you, so you go, you have a visit, it's not all that great, and you just stretch the next one out a little further than maybe they may want. My own mother, I'm one of 7 kids, and most of them all live their lives up in New York. I'm the main one that got away, you might say. And we would go, my wife and I, Colleen, would go, and we'd go visit and pick her up and take her to the hotel or wherever we're going. And occasionally, she'd be a little gripey. And I would just, not necessarily stop the car, but I would just look over and I'd say, Mom, here's the deal. We're not doing that. We're not going to spend our weekend angry and fussing. And I said, if you feel like that's what you want to do, then I'll just take you back home. But if you'd like to just relax and have a good weekend, I would love to.
Yeah.
And she was a dream.
Wow.
So
maybe she just needed some clarity.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, you've heard the word enmeshed. I think what happens in a lot of situations is the child craves the parent's approval. The parent craves the child's attention, affection, respect, whatever. And, it's kind of the classic 2 ticks and no dog, where I need this from you, you need that from me, and we use it to manipulate each other, and nobody's really having fun. My deal is I love my mom, but I don't need her to act a certain way for me to be okay. So I'm okay to say, Mom, I love you and I'd love to spend this weekend with you, but I'm going to be okay if I don't.
I know that John and I have had some challenges when family all brings up stuff from the past.
Right.
So we've always kind of said, you know what, we want to talk about what we're going to do in the future,
Right.
not about what we did 10 years ago, 30 years ago when we were 7. We want to build some things for the future, and that tends to help. I think when families get together, there's a little bit of a pecking order that goes into play that can be unhealthy.
There's a reality, though, that we have to deal with. Let's just, again, I don't mean this to sound critical or judgmental, but possibly we've continued on a growth curve, spiritually, emotionally, relationally, that maybe they've not had the advantage of.
Right.
Because they haven't taken it or it wasn't available, whatever.
Or they have a different marriage, different career paths.
So you're going to get around them, and they just don't operate by the same set of rules.
Yeah.
And I think there's times when we need to be big enough to just roll with that. They're doing the best they can with what they have, and let's just make the best of it.
That's awesome.
Now, not going to be back in a hurry, but...
And we've also found it's great to invite them into our world.
Yeah.
That you've got a different rhythm, and sometimes when you invite them into a different setting, different environment, then they don't go back into the patterns. Okay, this is a great question, and I think this is both for marriages as well as friendships. How do you sustain a deep friendship over time?
Wow.
I know that's a
tricky
big
one.
question.
Yeah. I would say the key word to me is deep, because I think over a lifetime, you probably have less than 5 friendships where you can say anything, almost do anything, and you're still going to be loved and accepted. I'm not a very good friend. What I mean by that is what I do for a living is I have intense conversations almost every day of my life. When it's time to relax, I don't feel like having another conversation.
Right.
So I'm not a great guy at keeping up with people. But I love depth. So I've got a handful of people that I've connected deeply with, my wife and I've connected deeply with. And they're the kind of friends that you could not see for 2 years.
And you pick right up.
And as soon as you sit down, it's like you were together last weekend.
Yeah.
And my best friend just moved back to Charleston. We met in college.
Oh, fun.
He was my best man at my wedding. I was best man at his. He became a Christian about 3 to 6 months after I did. And it was exact. And he's even told me, he said, in some ways you're not a great friend. I'll write you whatever, and it takes a little long to get a response.
We live a very different rhythm of life.
Gosh,
it makes it hard to be good friends.
Yeah.
But I like what you're saying, because I think sometimes this idea of a deep relationship, you can have a deep relationship with somebody, and it doesn't mean every time you're with them you talk about deep things.
No.
There can be a depth of understanding where sometimes you don't even have to say anything. You're just comfortable with each other.
Absolutely.
And then there's other things that if you know you need to go to them or you need to verbally process with them, they're going to understand what you're really saying and not judge you for it, and be able to actually say, that's enough, you're being ridiculous, now let's talk about what's really going on.
Yeah.
So, all right, good. And I know that you really helped me with John. I remember thinking, John just doesn't, he's not sharing his feelings deep enough. And you said, hey, you think because he can't verbally say what he is feeling, that he doesn't feel it deeply. And you helped me as a wife to understand, actually, he may even feel it deeper than you, but he just doesn't know how to say it. So I would say that to every woman out here that's like, my man is not deep. You don't understand. Maybe he does not know how to give voice to what he's feeling. And so instead of getting mad at him about it, why don't you help him be able to speak those things to you? Okay, how can I truly be open with someone without scaring them off? And there's a second part. Should I share about my past? If yes, at what point? I feel like I should answer this one, but no, I'm teasing.
Go ahead, I'm curious.
Well, okay, so first, truly be open without scaring them off. Well, first of all, that sounds like you're doing it too soon with some people, and you're sharing way too much. And you should not share about your past until you know that you're actually wanting to build a future with this person. That's my opinion. I don't think everybody needs to know everything about everyone. But
I mean, my question to both of those questions would be why? Like if you're wondering if it's too soon, then why are you even considering doing it?
Well, maybe they don't want to have anything hidden. Maybe they want to be open with the person. But again, I think there needs to be a trust level with that person.
Absolutely.
Where you don't just say,
Absolutely.
hey, here's everything about my life, and I hope you like me still. Give them a chance to actually find out who you are now before you tell them about who you've been. Because I think a lot of times people can't see who we are or who we're becoming because they're so overwhelmed by our past.
Probably the context of the relationship
Right.
would help me answer that question.
Yeah. So you don't want to scare them off.
Yeah.
But you also don't need to be scared about sharing about something, but it needs to be the right person in the right time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I mean, I love being transparent and vulnerable because, in a sense, once you've processed your past stuff,
it feels very removed from you.
yeah, it's almost like I'm talking about somebody else's life. But to scare someone off, I mean, that makes me think that, maybe there's some elements of my history that they may not be quite ready to include in the puzzle of me.
Right.
And that would just make me question what kind of a relationship it is.
Yeah, and I don't think everybody gets to read the pages of your book. I think there's some people, your husband gets to read the pages, and random people on
Even
the
the ones he
airplane
doesn't
don't get
wanna
to.
read, he gets
Yeah,
to read.
exactly. I highlight those for John. Okay, what are the best exercises, practical ways to gain back trust in your marriage after it's been broken?
Ooh,
I know.
wow. Forgiveness is an obligation. Trust is always earned. Trust is never a gift. And if you kind of do a study of that, you'll find out it holds pretty solid. I think it's 1 Corinthians 4, says, above all, a steward must be found faithful.
Yeah.
Found faithful. And I would say that means over time and in different contexts. So the thing about trust is something you don't even think about till it's gone.
Wow, until it's broken, until it's lost. Okay.
Yeah. Because I trust this chair.
Right.
Until I went over to another chair and it broke and I fell. But I trust the chair just because I don't even think about it. But once it breaks, I don't care how many times you tell me, oh no, we fixed it. I'm going to choose a different chair probably. And with marital challenges to trust, usually the perpetrator, if you will, the person who's damaged the trust, it's kind of interesting. It's like they were in a wreck and they went to the emergency room and they got bandaged up, and they feel better.
Right.
Well, the other person is in the wreck with them, and they're the ones who got run over by the truck, and they're not feeling so great.
Right.
And the other one's like, well, come on, man, you've forgiven me, haven't you? And let's get back to normal. Well, here's whatever. I hate to have to say some of this stuff, but trust is such an elemental part of a relationship that there's some damage to trust that I don't know that things can ever be completely the same.
Wow.
Now, I think God can get that piece where it needs to go. But the person who's done the hurting of the other person, they got to really be willing to walk that thing out.
So one of the worst things they could possibly do is, why don't you trust me? They should actually just have actions. They should just be building.
And have a calendar, like, well, you should be here by now, or you should,
they should let them have some time on that. Okay, all right.
Got to.
So, and finding out, I know for me, having a conversation to say, what are the things I can do and what are the things I shouldn't do so that you can trust me. So
lots of conversations.
Lots of conversations. So for a wife, if her husband has a problem with internet pornography, okay, let's have the laptop in the kitchen or something like that to put some boundaries and so that there can be constructive. And if the husband's like, no, you're not going to make me do that, then immediately she's going to be like, I can't
that's
trust
a
you.
major warning sign.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times I don't necessarily mean like a professional counselor, although that sometimes is needed, but sometimes a third party that can kind of buffer that accountability, and it not be quite as much of a hot potato all the time.
Yeah. All right. How to cope when you live together, work together, lead together, and raise a baby together. Did you ever do all this together? John and I sure did. So work together, live together, lead together, and now they're raising a baby together. How do they cope?
I would say it's rare that it works well. Because it just takes really it takes unique individuals to pull it off. I would say my wife and I have done all of that except for the work together part. And she did work for me. She was my office executive person for about a year. And it didn't work very well for us.
I've tried to fire myself a couple times. And I think John might have threatened to fire me a couple times. But I will say it is difficult, and I agree with you. One of the things is I think it's good to assess it and say, what can we do? Because I remember I sat down with John and I said, this is what I can do now that I'm raising a baby.
Right.
I can edit your books.
Right.
I can do this.
Right.
I can't do this and this and this anymore.
Right.
So I think when you have a baby now in the mix, you might need to step back and say, I can't do everything I used to do.
Right.
Or, hey, I remember I used to pay all the bills back when they were writing checks and stuff. And when it went electronic, John was like, I don't need you to do this anymore. I'm going to take this. And it was wonderful. So we had this different rhythm. But John and I would say, it is a unique situation. There's a lot of couples that don't necessarily have the grace of God in their life to do it like we do it.
And that's all I meant by that. I think, there's
I agree.
There's a lot of things that come into play. When I laugh about the year my wife worked for me, because the way it showed itself was not in some ways maybe that some people would expect. It wasn't like we fussed at work and that kind of thing. It would more be sitting at dinner and, you're home and you're kind of trying to unplug. And, Colleen would say, well, hey, we need to deal with blah, blah, blah. And I'd be like, baby, I don't want to talk about that right now. And it was just this weird, and then every once in a while you'd have to have that conversation. Okay, now, I need to talk to you as your boss, not as your husband. Well, as soon as you do that, you're already in trouble. I mean, it's over. Whatever follows that is not going to be good.
Yeah. Well, it's actually made us grow up a lot.
Sure.
Because we've done it every possible way wrong. I know that. So how do I take responsibility for my actions, but not for another person's feelings? So they're saying, I want to be responsible for my actions, but not for their feelings. And the line between these often feel blurred.
Right.
I can understand that.
Yeah. And again, plays out differently in different relationships, husband, wife, parent, child, friends. Let's use a parent and child. There's nothing wrong with a parent wanting to have, lots of time together. Let's do lunch every Sunday. They live close enough. We'll keep the kids 2 nights a week, whatever. And that may work for everybody. But let's just say that it doesn't work for both of the children, married, husband, wife. Maybe it works for the child of that family, but not the spouse. There's times when you have to deal with, we're going to follow what we believe we need to do, and we're responsible for the integrity and strength of our home. We're not responsible. We can care about and be sensitive to the issue of your feelings, but that's not what we're going to base our decisions on. We're not ultimately responsible for that. Another application of that would be how my actions affect someone else. I mean, someone who, I'm trying to think of a situation, a good example where it's not something wrong that's being done, but, there's some that are not wrong, but they cross the line and become wrong. A guy who loves to hunt. And, hunting's not wrong. It's not damaging.
But that depends who you talk to. But yes.
Damaging and destructive in and of itself. But what if over time, or maybe he started with a blind spot of how much hunting is okay. And what he doesn't realize is that his wife's starving for time with him, where she gets the same amount of passion and attention as hunting has, and or just time out of her own rhythm where he's kind of taken up some of the slack. So there's lots of ways where we've really got to look at our actions and their effect on other people.
My husband, he loves birthdays. He thinks that there's a birthday week for John Bevere. I mean, he loves
so
birthdays.
So he loves his birthday or birthdays?
He loves his birthday. He loves his birthday. And I kind of am
I'm kind of with him on that.
Yeah, and I'm kind of like, birthdays are fine. It's like I'll fly home from overseas on my birthday. I'll say I don't want to party. And so we had to have a talk because John felt that my inaction around his birthday, I wasn't paying enough attention. My actions of ignoring or being like, hey, you're grown now. You don't get to be like, we're doing the boys now. That it was associated that I didn't care about him. And so he had to explain to me how he felt about his birthday. Now, I will say it's so high, I feel like every year I'm already going to fail, and it's a month away. But he has such a high expectation on his birthday. And so I had to be able to say to him, it wasn't that I was withholding that. It just isn't important to me. So I think when I was able to separate what he perceived as my feelings or lack of feelings on his birthday and my actions and inactions, then I think that was good. And I do think sometimes that there are people that are saying, well, that's too bad you didn't like that. I think we need to have a responsibility that if we care about the person, if my actions hurt them, I need to say, why? Why did that hurt you? Okay, well, and have that conversation. And if it's just silly, then be able to say, well, that's not what I meant. And that's not what that said.
And I also think there would be value in dissecting down to what the importance is. Like if I'm John and I'm hurt that you don't make a big deal about my birthdays, if I take it to the point of, well, if you loved me, you'd...
Assigning too much value to it.
That's not fair. But I don't think it'd be wrong to say, because of this or that in my childhood, because of this or that, whatever, it really, really means a lot to me. That's probably in an acceptable zone.
Absolutely.
But not if you make it about, well, if you loved me, blank.
You would do this, right? Yeah. All right. What are the warning signs that I have a boundary issue in my relationship?
Anger is always about boundaries.
Okay.
You don't use the word always very often.
Okay.
But I'm comfortable. Anger is always about boundaries. Now, it's not always unhealthy. It's not always wrong.
Okay.
But it's always about, anger is always about
Is it a warning sign? Something's out of order?
Every emotion serves a purpose. Anger is the emotion of distancing and protection and whatever. Of Italians. Yeah, it took me a minute to catch that.
That's all right.
Yeah, but anger is always about, I want you to do something you're not doing or stop doing something you are doing. That's obviously very loosely. So how do I know I have a boundary problem? Emotion, encroachment creates emotion.
Okay.
When there's an encroachment of boundaries, it's always going to create an emotional response.
So you feel violated?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, the tricky thing is it may manifest, this might be the issue, and it may show up over here. And, but yeah, almost always when there's boundary violations, you're going to have emotional smoke. Where there's smoke, there's fire. And but anger's a big one. Anger's another thought that's cool about anger is anger's a secondary emotion. It's never the first one.
Yeah.
You feel it after you've been hurt, disrespected, abandoned or whatever. So it's really good to listen to emotions, don't believe everything they tell you, but follow them because they're trying to tell you something.
Yeah.
And
I know for me, when God started to put his finger on my issue with anger, I found out the real issue was fear. Yeah. So the anger masked the fear. Yep. So it wasn't an anger issue, it was a fear issue. And
That's
actually,
good.
if you go a little further, it was a belief issue, an unbelief issue, because I believe that God was good for everybody, but not for me.
Yeah.
So there was, I had to go all the way to the root of that. What is the warning sign that I'm seeking to control or manipulate other people in my life?
I mean, not meaning to be comical, but people just avoid you.
No, it would
you
be
either
true.
you either have short friendships with healthier people, and all the friends you have for any length of time are not very healthy, because healthy people are not going to hang around that. They're not going to. It's just not going to work for them. So watching the kind of friends you attract and retain tells you something about yourself.
What about in a marriage situation?
If you're manipulative, just assume you are. No. I mean, really, to some degree, I mean that. Assume that you are, meaning we all have a desire to work toward the things that we think we need and want, and we may not necessarily have direct ways that we go about it. So I mean it, assume that you probably have some less than direct, full of integrity ways you go about getting what you want. And if you just take the word manipulate, it's not a bad word.
Maybe they're trying to protect themselves for a season.
Well, manipulate just means to move that plan. I manipulated that plan.
Yeah.
So it's not bad. It's just, it does get down to motives and methods.
So if you're manipulating someone to control them, that's always unhealthy. But if you're manipulating something to change a situation where you're no longer training them to treat you the way you used to train them to treat you, but you're training them a new way, that would be moving it towards health rather than moving it towards control.
A word you just said triggered this for me. If you're manipulating someone to control them, and I would probably be pretty comfortable looking at manipulation the same way. People don't have control issues. What you were doing a minute ago, where you were kind of following it down. People that feel the need to control don't trust they're going to get what they need unless they make unless they control it. So control is really a trust issue, and trust is really a fear issue. And so when I'm around someone who's manipulative or controlling, I'm kind of what you did, and I was kind of smiling when you did it because it was beautifully done, how you went from the problem itself and worked down, because here's the key. This is the fruit, this is the root. If you attack the fruit, you strengthen the root.
Yeah.
And
you're pruning the tree.
So, and it's just going to grow bigger fruit of that same kind. So with manipulation and control, it really is someone who's fearful that I'm not going to get what I need. I'm not going to get love. I'm not going to get whatever. And that at least elicits some compassion from us. Doesn't make it any more pleasant, but it elicits compassion and maybe helps us think a little bit more about coming up with a solution than just dealing with the person.
Okay, what does it look like to love people without trying to change them, yet knowing that changing negative patterns of behavior would be the best thing for them?
The joke, woman's praying for her husband, and she kind of has a Freudian slip, and she says, God, you love him while I change him. And the reality of it is, if someone I love and someone I assume loves me is kind of committed pretty often to strategies to change me, it's really pretty hard for me to feel good about myself. And I'm not trusting the other players in the game, God and that person. So, I think...
It's never worked well for John and I. When he tries to change me or I try to change him, it's never worked well. And God never actually talks to me about anybody changing but me. When I pray, he's like, you. He doesn't ever talk to me about anybody else.
And oddly, when we allow God to change us, it's pretty interesting how it affects the other person.
Because it changes the pattern. The
dance, they would call it in some of the literature.
I love that. How do I identify and overcome wrong beliefs I adopted in my childhood if I operate in these subconsciously? So they're saying it's a deep river responding up here. How do they change? And
that's pretty much how we operate. Whatever. I love to talk about it. It's kind of my little hobby right now, studying the brain itself. And one of the biggest jobs the brain does is clear your plate of what you don't need to pay attention to, because attention's a very rich resource, very expensive energy-wise and everything. So what your brain does is, once you've done something enough that it's kind of become learned, it sort of packages it as a program.
And it's like, we're not going to think about this anymore.
And then it puts it in a different part of the brain, literally.
So it's an autopilot.
And what happens is now it becomes, stimulus, response, reward. But the problem is stimulus, response, bad result, but yet you keep doing it. And kind of that's a really, really oversimplified way to say what we're all up against. What we're all up against is most unhealthy behavior in our adulthood is behavior we learned to survive in childhood that we don't need to do anymore, but we still do.
I know for me, when I ask God, what's going on here, and why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And I began to renew my mind. When I was ready to hear it, he went to the very root of the why. And he kept saying, it's not about why. He said, you can figure out you spend your whole life figuring out why you're messed up. Lisa, you'll still be messed up once you know why. He said you need to know the truth to a greater degree of intimacy than you've known the lie.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of times people try to go back when they actually haven't put what they need, deposited what they needed in their life to go forward.
Right.
And so I feel like God can root out those subconscious things if we take it to the Holy Spirit and read the Word of God, and it renews our mind.
And kind of what we've already talked about, the way you figure it, like you said, they're subconscious, so you're kind of not aware of them.
Right.
Well, the way you become aware of them is by what it causes in your life.
Right. Well, for John and I, John would say, why when we're hugging are you the first one to start patting and then push me away? And why do you always pull away? And he finally said to me, I'm not your dad. And I looked at him, I said, I know you're not my dad. And he's like, but you're acting like all men leave and that one day I'll leave you. And so you have this, and I remember I had to say, he's right. But I was mad because I didn't know how to stop it. So when I got alone with God, I said, I need you to begin to heal this. And God started to heal the wound between my father and I. When he healed the wound between my father and I, it healed the wound between my husband and I. So again, it's like the anger, just trying to change your response without going into a deeper healing. So we believe
I had a similar thing with my mother and wife. My mom had a heart attack, and I felt like she manipulated my father with, well, Leroy, you better do X, Y, Z, or I might die of a heart attack. And so I kind of took up an offense for my dad against my mom, but I also kind of made like an inner vow that no woman's going to ever control me like that.
Yeah.
And so here I am married to this wonderful woman that loves me. And
who has not had a heart attack.
No, and this is early in our marriage, and I'm a brand new Christian, and I would react weirdly to her being assertive and confident and whatever, and eventually what God helped me do is trail it down to that situation with my mom where I had just decided no woman's going to control me, and she wasn't trying to control me,
Right.
but I just overreacted. And that's one of the ways you smoke these things out. When you know the situation's this big, but your response
reaction,
is this big. And you're like, okay, there's something else going on here.
It's a trigger. All right. How do I break iniquity or negative tendencies in my family?
Oh, my goodness. All right. Responsibility, authority, and power.
Yeah.
If you're the head of the house,
Yeah.
you have a fair amount of responsibility. If you're the third kid out of 6, ain't your job.
Yeah. I know that for John and I, we realized going forward. Going forward. We were like, now we're a new family going forward.
Absolutely.
We're gonna renounce things and move forward.
Well, the exciting thing is we can, by our choices, by our actions, by our obedience, we can change multi-generational patterns.
Right.
But to
go back is almost impossible.
Gosh,
It'll make you crazy. Don't do it.
Oh
Okay, we're almost done here. Last question.
Okay.
What if the other person is not in agreement with my boundaries?
I believe we can make choices that honor our boundaries without violating somebody else's. It's a tricky little tightrope walk sometimes, particularly like in a marriage or something. But if the key to boundaries is responsibility, and I'm responsible for everything inside my personal space, my circle, then the key is to communicate enough to where you're taking responsibility for yours, I'm taking responsibility for mine. And absolutely, the other person may say, I'm good with the way we've always done things. I believe you can move toward health. And it's a little tacky to say because there's people that I'm sure are in tricky situations. You're going to benefit either way. You're going to come out healthier and maybe with a spouse that came with you, or you're going to end up healthier with a spouse who chose not to go with you. But I can promise you this, if you do nothing different, nothing's going to change.
Thank you.
So you end up not healthier, and with a marriage that's not healthier.
So either way, move forward.
There's some risk involved.
Yeah, sure. There always is.
Yeah.
All right, well, I hope this has been so helpful. I hope we've been able to do a little bit of a deep dive into the questions. We love hearing from you. I know that you enjoyed the session, so these are just a little bit more pointed. Chip, thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Fun.
You're amazing.
I'm honored to have done it.